The Mojave Desert is unforgiving. During the day, temperatures soar above 115 degrees Fahrenheit, hot enough to cook an egg on a rock. At night, they plummet to near freezing, creating a hellish cycle that can kill even the most experienced desert dwellers within hours. It's the last place on Earth you'd expect to find a thoroughbred horse tied to a dead Joshua tree with nothing but a fraying rope and the clothes on its back. But that's exactly where Midnight found himself on a scorching Tuesday morning in September, abandoned by humans who had promised to love him forever. The story begins 3 days earlier at the Riverside County Fairgrounds, where Midnight had been the star attraction of the annual rodeo. This magnificent black stallion, with his glossy coat and powerful build, had won countless barrel racing competitions and brought home more trophies than his owner could count. But success in the rodeo world is fleeting, and when Midnight pulled a tendon during his last race, his value dropped to zero in the eyes of his owner, Jake Morrison. Morrison was a man who measured worth in dollar signs, not loyalty. When a veterinarian told him Midnight would need months of expensive rehabilitation with no guarantee of returning to competition level, Morrison made a decision that would shock even the most hardened ranch hands. He loaded Midnight into his trailer under the pretense of taking him to a retirement facility. Instead, he drove deep into the Mojave Desert, to a place where cell phone towers couldn't reach and where the only witnesses were vultures circling overhead. There, beside an ancient Joshua tree that had survived 100 years of desert storms, Morrison tied Midnight with just enough rope to reach a few scattered patches of dried grass. "Sorry, boy," Morrison muttered as he climbed back into his truck. Business is business. Morrison drove away, leaving Midnight to face the desert alone. For 3 days and nights, Midnight endured hell on earth. The rope around his neck grew tighter as dehydration caused his body to swell. His once glossy coat became matted with dust and sweat. Flies buzzed around his eyes, and his lips cracked from thirst. By the third day, Midnight had stopped trying to break free. He stood with his head hanging low, waiting for death to claim him as it had claimed so many desert creatures before him. But Midnight wasn't alone in the desert. 20 miles away, at a small research station operated by the University of California, a team of wildlife biologists was conducting a study on desert tortoise migration patterns. The team was led by Dr. Elena Rodriguez, a 34-year-old conservation biologist who had dedicated her life to protecting endangered species in harsh environments. Dr. Rodriguez had been tracking a particularly old desert tortoise they had nicknamed Winston for over 2 years. Winston was special. An estimated 80 years old, he was one of the oldest tortoises in the region and had become something of a celebrity in conservation circles. His movements were being monitored by a GPS tracker that transmitted his location every 6 hours to Dr. Rodriguez's research station. On Wednesday morning, something strange appeared on Winston's tracking data. Instead of his usual slow, methodical movement pattern, Winston had been stationary in the same location for over 18 hours. This was highly unusual behavior for a tortoise who typically moved at least a quarter mile each day in search of food and water. "Something's wrong," Dr. Rodriguez told her research partner, graduate student Marcus Chun. "Winston never stays in one place this long unless he's in trouble." Dr. Rodriguez and Marcus loaded their ATV with emergency supplies and headed into the desert, following the GPS coordinates that would lead them to Winston. The ride took nearly 2 hours across rocky terrain and sand dunes that could swallow a vehicle whole if the driver wasn't careful. What they found when they reached Winston's location defied all logic and expectation. The ancient tortoise was positioned directly beneath a dying horse, providing the only shade available in the barren landscape. Winston, who typically avoided large animals and human activity, had apparently decided to stay with Midnight, offering what little comfort he could to a fellow desert prisoner. "I couldn't believe what I was seeing," Dr. Rodriguez would later tell reporters. This 80-year-old tortoise, who should have been focused on his own survival, was literally keeping vigil under a horse that had been left to die. It was the most incredible display of interspecies compassion I've ever witnessed. Midnight was barely conscious when they found him. His tongue was swollen, His eyes were sunken, and his breathing was shallow and labored. Dr. Rodriguez estimated he had maybe 6 to 8 hours left before organ failure would make rescue impossible. But here's where the story takes an even more incredible turn. Dr. Rodriguez was a wildlife biologist, not a veterinarian. She had no experience with horses and no equipment designed for large animal rescue. Her research station was equipped for tortoises, lizards, and small desert mammals. Not a 1,000-pound thoroughbred dying of dehydration. What she did have was a satellite phone and a network of contacts throughout the conservation community. Dr. Rodriguez's first call was to Dr. James Wilson, a large animal veterinarian in Phoenix who specialized in emergency desert rescues. Dr. Wilson had assisted with wild horse roundups and knew the challenges of desert animal rescue better than anyone. "Elena, I need you to listen very carefully," Dr. Wilson said over the crackling satellite connection. "That horse is in severe shock, and moving him incorrectly could kill him. But if you don't do something in the next few hours, he's going to die anyway." Dr. Wilson began walking Dr. Rodriguez through emergency field treatment procedures over the phone. Using supplies from her research station and water from their emergency reserves, she began the delicate process of rehydrating Midnight using techniques she was learning in real time. Meanwhile, Marcus Chun was coordinating a rescue operation unlike anything the desert had ever seen. Using social media and the university's emergency communication network, word spread quickly about the dying horse and the tortoise who refused to leave his side. Within hours, volunteers were mobilizing from across Southern California. A helicopter pilot who specialized in wilderness rescues volunteered his services. A horse trailer owner drove 200 miles with specialized equipment. Local news crews picked up the story, and donations began pouring in to fund the rescue operation. But the most surprising help came from an unexpected source. Jake Morrison, the man who had abandoned Midnight in the desert, was watching the evening news when he saw his horse's story. The reporter was calling it the miracle of the desert tortoise, and Morrison's neighbors were already starting to put the pieces together about who might have abandoned such a beautiful horse in the middle of nowhere. Faced with mounting public scrutiny and his own guilty conscience, Morrison made a decision that surprised everyone, including himself. He called the rescue hotline that had been set up to coordinate Midnight's care. "That's my horse," Morrison told the volunteer who answered the phone. "And I want to make this right." Morrison not only confessed to abandoning Midnight, but he also agreed to sign over ownership of the horse to Dr. Rodriguez's research station, along with a substantial donation to cover all medical expenses and future care. The actual rescue took place on Thursday evening, just as the desert sun was beginning to set. The helicopter arrived first, followed by a convoy of vehicles carrying veterinary supplies, specialized equipment, and dozens of volunteers who had driven hours to help save a horse they had never met. Dr. Wilson, who had flown in from Phoenix, took over Midnight's medical care. "In 30 years of veterinary medicine, I've never seen a horse survive this level of dehydration and heat exposure," he said as he worked to stabilize Midnight's condition. "The fact that he's still alive is nothing short of miraculous." But the real miracle worker was Winston the tortoise, who refused to move from his position even as dozens of people and vehicles surrounded his desert vigil. It was as if he understood that his job wasn't finished until Midnight was safe. The rescue operation took 6 hours. Using a specialized sling system, the team carefully loaded Midnight into the helicopter for transport to an equine hospital in Los Angeles. Throughout the entire process, Winston remained stationed at the base of the Joshua Tree, watching every move with ancient, knowing eyes. As the helicopter lifted off into the star-filled desert sky, Dr. Rodriguez knelt beside Winston and gently picked up the old tortoise. "You save his life, you know," she whispered. "You're a hero." Winston's recovery was remarkable. Within 2 weeks, his dehydration was corrected, his weight had stabilized, and his natural spirit began to return. The injured tendon that had cost him his racing career healed perfectly with proper care and rehabilitation. But the most amazing part of Midnight's recovery was his inseparable bond with Winston. Dr. Rodriguez's research station was expanded to include facilities for Midnight, and the unlikely pair became permanent residents of the Desert Research Facility. Every morning, Midnight would lower his head to the ground so Winston could climb onto his neck for their daily tour of the property. Every evening, they could be found resting together under the shade of a new shelter built specifically for their friendship. The story of Midnight and Winston became an international sensation. National Geographic featured them in a documentary about unlikely animal friendships. The Discovery Channel produced a special about desert survival and the power of interspecies bonds. Children's books were written about their friendship, and schools across the country adopted their story as a lesson in compassion and loyalty. Dr. Rodriguez's research station, now called the Winston Midnight Desert Conservation Center, became a destination for scientists studying animal behavior and cognition. The facility expanded to rescue and rehabilitate other desert animals, funded by donations from people around the world who have been touched by the story of a tortoise who saved a horse. Jake Morrison, facing public backlash and legal consequences for animal abandonment, eventually served community service at the Conservation Center. Working alongside Midnight every day became his path to redemption, and he eventually became one of the facility's most dedicated volunteers. "I thought I was teaching that horse about winning and losing," Morrison reflected months later as he brushed Midnight's coat. But Winston taught us both something more important. That real strength isn't about competition. It's about showing up for someone when they need you most. 3 years later, Winston and Midnight are still inseparable. Winston, now 83 years old, moves more slowly than he used to, but Midnight has adjusted his pace accordingly. They explore the desert together at tortoise speed, proving that the best friendships aren't about matching energy levels. They're about matching hearts. Visitors to the Conservation Center often ask Dr. Rodriguez what she learned from the rescue that changed her understanding of animal behavior. Her answer is always the same. Winston didn't save Midnight because he understood the concept of rescue or heroism. He saved him because when he saw a creature suffering alone, his instinct was to stay and provide comfort. In a world where humans abandon animals for profit, an 80-year-old tortoise showed us what loyalty really looks like. The Joshua tree where Midnight was abandoned still stands in the desert, but now it's marked with a plaque that tells the story of the tortoise who refused to let a horse die alone. Desert hikers often stop to read the inscription. In memory of the day we learned that heroes come in all sizes and love knows no species. Because sometimes the most surprising rescues don't come from those with the most resources or training. Sometimes they come from those with the biggest hearts, even if that heart beats inside a shell that's been carrying it through the desert for over 80 years. If this incredible story of unlikely friendship and desert survival moved you, share it with someone who needs to believe in the power of compassion. Subscribe for more amazing rescue stories that prove love always finds a way.